My name is Harmony Sanderson. I lead the marketing function at eSkilled. The eSkilled brand, if you're not familiar with it, we have a few products and services under our umbrella. We have a student and learning management system. We also sell e-learning and regular training resources. And not too long ago, we also launched a really cool tool called AI Course Creator, which the name very much says what it does. Co-presenting with me today is Richard Lang. Richard, did you want to do an introduction?
Yeah, thank you. So I'm Richard. I'm the founder of RTO Acceleration. So we are a digital marketing agency that specializes or focuses on helping RTOs and education companies to acquire more students through digital channels.
Fantastic. All right. So before we kick off, I would just like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands and the waterways throughout Australia. We pay our respects to all elders, past, present, and emerging, and all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in today's session. So what we'll be covering off in today's session is why student acquisition matters in today's climate, common myths and mistakes that often hold RTOs back, 3 key documents that you need to create to optimize your acquisition and inquiry strategy, lead nurture essentials, enrollment and conversion strategy, LLND assessments, optimizing your enrollment and retention strategy, monitoring, testing, and refining, and scalability and how to use automation to be more efficient and also to scale. So, Richard, did you want to take us through why this matters in 2025 and beyond?
Sure thing. So, well, with the changes in the industry, there are a few core challenges that we need to overcome. So the first being competition. It's not just about the amount of new RTOs entering the market, but also the fact that many are realizing that relying on word of mouth is no longer enough. So we are seeing more and more businesses turning towards digital channels. And because of this, it's not as effective anymore to just have a good course and run some ads. You now need a well-oiled marketing and sales machine. So secondly, then you've got compliance constraints. So unlike most industries, RTOs can't just easily change offers, messaging, or processes freely. So things like standards, funding rules, and audits restrict what you can say and how you operate. So that means you just can't, unfortunately, win on creativity alone. You win by being more structured and more precise. And then thirdly is the rising digital expectations. So prospective students and people in general now expect fast responses, relevant information, personalized communication. So they're comparing your experience not only with other RTOs, your competitors, but to the standard they experience in everyday life. So if your follow-up is slow or generic or confusing, they don't necessarily complain, they just disappear. So then from there, people are now expecting more, but it's challenging to meet those expectations because honestly, nurture and sales processes are hard to build. They're never set and forget, and they're constantly affected by staff turnover, workload, competing priorities. So what might start as a good process slowly degrades, and then enrollments slow down. And then finally is that classic marketing and sales alignment. So it's that classic finger pointing loop where marketing says, the leads are good, and it's the sales people problem, and then sales say the leads just aren't that good, and so it's just be back and forth. So most of the time, both parties are partly right. The real issue isn't effort, it's just the lack of a shared system, like shared data and shared definitions of success. And that's why this matters, because student acquisition for RTOs are no longer about just running more ads or hiring better sales staff or chasing the next AI tool, which I'm hearing a lot these days. It's about building a connected compliance system that moves students forward from first inquiry to enrollment without just relying on one specific part.
Absolutely.
So I do talk with a lot of RTOs on a weekly basis, and there are some common themes that always seem to pop up that I do think get in the way of growth. So the first one I hear a lot is, if we get more leads, enrollments will follow. Now, if your system is optimized and airtight, then this might actually hold true. But if not, more leads don't fix broken systems, they expose them. So when volume increases without structure, the follow-up slows, consistency drops, and good leads get missed. So enrollments don't necessarily come from volume alone, they come from movement, which is helping students progress confidently through their specific personal journey. So on the flip side of that sort of myth is lead quality being the main issue. So when you actually delve into it, what looks like a poor lead quality is actually more often poor context, poor timing, or a lack of understanding of student intent. So most RTOs don't necessarily have bad leads, they have unsegmented leads. So when different students are treated the same way, quality always looks worse than it actually is. And then that third myth I hear a lot is, if price is low, or commonly in the RTO space, the course is funded, students will just easily enroll themselves. Now, price does matter, especially with our current cost of living, but money isn't the only cost, especially in the education industry, because students are also paying with time, energy, focus, and opportunity cost. So while lowering the price removes one barrier, it doesn't remove the risk of lost time, which arguably is more valuable. So I have seen this before on a few occasions when an RTO has a fully funded course. They do, because it is fully funded, get leads in easily and cheaply, but because they don't have an optimized system on the back end, they struggle to convert them. So then myth 4 is, we can judge performance by looking at one channel at a time. So this is very common, I hear with or see when there is an RTO is brought on like a freelancer or an agency, and the agency, or they might come back to them and say, oh yeah, we've had a really good month, the Google ads and the Facebook ads are looking really good, but then the RTO is like, well, this month was actually quite low for us. And that's what happens because student acquisition functions, especially the more channels you have in it, as an engine, not a set of isolated parts. So you've got marketing, nurture, sales, compliance, and follow-up all contribute to enrollments. So if you look solely at individual parts, while the system underperforms, can lead to the wrong conclusions. Strong outcomes come from a high-performing system, not high-performing channels. And so a common example I've seen as well is that, especially with the marketing space, Facebook ads quite often will bring in lower quality leads, but if you turn them off, the performance of the marketing, like the entire system, drops, because it is actually all integrated in ways that we can't necessarily see with our reporting and our tracking. And that's why the engine is so important. The fifth myth, more awareness automatically leads to more enrollments. So it's important to remember that awareness creates interest, not decisions. And specifically, it only works when it's in front of the right people. Because if awareness reaches the wrong audience, like even the best system won't convert it. But on the opposite side, even in front of the right audience, without clear next steps, timely follow-up, and reassurance, awareness just becomes noise. Attention may open the door, but systems are what help students move through it. And the last myth is, if someone doesn't enroll quickly, they're not serious. And this is, again, one of the biggest ones I see a lot, is because if most students don't say no, they just pause because they're balancing timing, confidence, and fit. So delayed decisions aren't necessarily a rejection, they're just unresolved certainty. Because well-designed systems keep the conversation moving without pressure. So moving on from that is highlighting, the 3 core documents that your RTO needs to develop that will make your student acquisition process easier and more effective. Now, the first one is you're building your avatar, or you could call it your learner profile. So, because when you look at students who enroll and succeed, you should see patterns start to appear, because those patterns tell you who your best students and therefore leads actually are, because the strongest students tend to have similarities. And once you know this, these early signals, if you are watching for them, let you identify a strong fit much earlier on in the journey. So instead of treating every inquiry the same, you can see which segments or avatars in this case convert, engage, and complete best. Because then from there, that improves outcomes across the whole journey, because follow-up becomes more relevant, enrollment conversations are clearer, and support needs are easier to anticipate. So these learner profiles definitely also improve marketing. So from our point as an agency, we really try to develop these because it helps us with the advertising, because it allows us to target segments much more accurately. Your messaging is able to become clearer, and lead quality just naturally improves because you're targeting better quality people. And then also, it helps sales to prioritize. If you do have a lot of leads coming in, sales can't always get to all of them straight away. So they can focus first on the high fit leads, but then they can also use that to tailor conversations based on their profile insights, and spend less time chasing for leads. Because overall, learner profiles turn answers into insight, essentially, and insight leads to better decisions across marketing, enrollments, and delivery.
Absolutely. So as you look at, looking now at creating a student acquisition journey map, ask yourself, what are the key stages that a student goes through from first inquiry to onboarding? For most RTOs, it looks something like this. You've got acquisition and inquiry, to then lead nurture, an enrollment conversation, then your LLND and compliance checks, to your enrollment, and then onboarding. Here are a few tips that you can consider when you're creating your student journey map unique to your RTO. Use data to identify what the most common first touch point is that you have with students. So, it might be a website forum or a phone call or a social media ad, for example. Make sure that you capture every touch point and involve your team in this. Sit down with your admin, your trainers, your sales staff, and ask them what happens to a student at each step of the way. And this will help you create a 360-degree view. Highlight compliance checks and color code these on your maps to make sure that they stand out as non-negotiables. And map your students' emotions throughout the process. They might be excited, it could be confused, anxious, impatient. Understanding this will help you tailor your communication so that you are providing the right reassurance at the right time, and you can adjust the tone of those communications to ensure that they're appropriate. Draw a line between what automation can do and what humans need to handle as part of this process, and add the time frame or the ideal time frame for each step. Use swim lanes to show responsibilities and make it clear who owns each step so it's not ambiguous. And lastly, place feedback loops after onboarding and ensure that, and after course completion, to refine the journey continuously. Once you lay that all out visually, you can usually spot where your delays or drop-offs happen, or areas where you need to improve your process. So this will help you prioritize where you're going to spend your energy and effort.
Okay, so when it comes to actually developing a marketing strategy, it does start with the learner profiles, or those avatars I was talking about before. And we'll get into the practicalities of how to develop them in a bit, but essentially it allows you to get clear on who your best students are, why they enroll, what they need to feel confident to move forward. Because without that clarity, everything else essentially becomes guesswork. So the strategy also needs to match marketing to the student's decision stage, because it is important to remember some people are just exploring, some are just comparing options, but then some are ready to enroll. So good marketing especially helps students take the next step wherever they are, not necessarily to jump straight to a decision they're not ready for. Now, also a strong strategy is designed for quality, not just volume, because more inquiries aren't helpful if they don't turn into enrolments. So the focus should be on attracting the right students, even if that means fewer total leads. It also has to support, nurture, and enrolment conversation. So marketing shouldn't stop when someone fills out a form. It shouldn't just be given to sales from there. It should essentially give sales and enrolment teams the context they need to guide students properly and essentially help them. And then finally, a strong strategy is measured by enrollments and ROIs, not necessarily clicks, likes, form fills. They're still important metrics to look at, but what matters is how many students enroll and whether the system is working sustainably. Because when all these pieces are aligned, marketing stops being about a set of, say, tactics and starts operating as a reliable system. And that reliable system is what you need to scale.
For sure. So building on what you just covered, here's what your RTO's marketing strategy document should be covering off. Firstly, goal and success metrics. This is what you're trying to achieve. So it might be enrollment numbers or a specific cost per lead or conversion rate, etc. Secondly, incorporating the audience and learner profiles that Richard touched on, including learner motivations, barriers, and preferred communication channels for your learners. Competitor and market research. As you know, the RTO space is competitive, and you really need to understand your competition so that you can find a unique point of difference. Understand who else these learners will be considering, how their pricing and offer compares, and gaps that you can own. Your offer and positioning. So this is the courses that you promote, how you'll position them to the various segments, your value proposition, proof points, and why you versus competitors. With the journey and funnel plan, this is where you map the entire acquisition journey end to end, which we touched on. You should be documenting what should happen at each step, who owns it, and where that automation supports momentum. So your channel strategy, this should include the core channels that you plan to use to attract and communicate with your students and the strategy for how you'll use them. The content and campaign plan should outline what content you'll be delivering at each stage of that customer journey. So think email lead nurture series, landing pages, case studies, funding explainers, intake reminders, and objection handling content. It should also list what campaigns you plan to run throughout the year, what the campaign will be promoting, and what sort of messaging or assets you'll need to support and run that campaign. The budget and timeline portion of this will cover off what you plan to spend throughout the year and also by channel, which links to your campaign calendar, and ensure that everything runs to and aligns with your intake timing. And lastly, your optimization rhythm. This will be how you plan to measure and monitor your success, linking back to the goals and success metrics that you've set yourself in this document. We'll cover this off in a bit more detail later, but this should include the cadence, key metrics, and how you'll measure that in the tests you'll want to run. Okay. So let's shift gears now and talk about optimizing your acquisition and inquiry strategy. Here are some tips for developing a multi-channel strategy. First, start with student behavior. Where do your students like to spend their time? Is it on email, Messenger, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, or maybe it's somewhere else completely? Pick 2 to 3 core channels and don't spread yourself too thin, especially if you're a smaller RTO. Choose a mix of direct response channels like SMS and email with engagement channels like social and Messenger. Create channel-specific messaging. Obviously, what you're going to communicate via SMS, for example, is going to differ greatly than email, which would be a channel that you'd probably provide more detailed information like funding or course breakdowns. Also, ensure that when a student moves between channels, there's consistency in communication and that systems keep record of where they're at in that journey so that there's not double up or overlap. Monitor your channel effectiveness to determine where to invest more time and energy, and acknowledge what communication preferences your students prefer and consider asking them too. This will help you meet your students where they prefer to be. So let's talk about speed to lead. This is one of the biggest factors in whether a student is going to enroll with your RTO or someone else. Research shows that contacting a new inquiry within 5 minutes makes you 9 times more likely to convert compared to waiting an hour. Responding after 1 hour can actually result in up to a 90% drop in interest, which is huge. And many RTOs can take days before a follow-up. And by then, it's more than likely that the student has spoken to one of your competitors, and there's a good chance you might even lose the lead. So systemizing your acquisition process helps you ensure that every lead is followed up with immediately and that potential lead loss gap is closed. Today's students don't just sit in one channel either, so if you're only using one channel, you're probably missing out on opportunities. This, systemizing your acquisition process will help you integrate more channels. So if a student fills out a web form, they might get an SMS confirmation, for example, a messenger follow-up and an email sequence, all consistent, all reinforcing the same message.
Okay, so when it comes to ads and landing pages, it's easy to assume the goal is to get as many inquiries as possible, which does make sense, but we know that more inquiries don't necessarily mean better bottom line results, because a lower cost per lead doesn't yet necessarily mean that that will help the bottom line. So what really matters is who those inquiries turn into. So if the process is too vague or easy even, you often attract people who aren't a good fit, and that slows everything down later. So for example, if price is important, hiding it can bring in a lot of people who then drop off later. So showing price on your landing pages will reduce inquiries, but potentially improve lead to student conversion rate. Now, I do know this because this is one of the first experiments we do with particular clients. If the sales team tell us that they keep losing sales because of price, we'll experiment by putting price on the landing page. Now, always the opt-in rate of that landing page will always go down, but the lead quality always increases. So because the people who do inquire are usually more informed and more serious, and it gets rid of those price conscious people. And so the lead, then you get better conversations out of that, and then also faster decisions. But it's not always necessarily worth it if you're looking at the bottom line. Sometimes it's still better to get a cheap, lower quality in, but then on other times it is well worth it. And it all depends on the specific RTO, and that's also why it's super important to track those sort of bottom line metrics and not just the amount of leads and the cost per lead you get. Yeah, because you really want to see how many inquiries turn into enrollments, and then also how much does it cost to get each enrollment, because the goal shouldn't be simply to increase inquiries. The goal is to attract the right inquiries.
That's a really good example you've given there. We actually used to have pricing on our training resources, and we found that it was just an inquiry killer for us, but we knew that we have a really strong sales team and a really strong sales process. And as soon as we removed the prices on our website, like you said, there was a bit of, traffic drop off, but what we did see ultimately was a boost in revenue at the end of the day. So, it is, and we touch on this throughout the session, but it is about understanding where your strengths and weaknesses are in the process and catering to that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So now, so looking at your sales funnel, your RTO sales funnel, at this stage, personalization really helps you stand out. So segment your leads by source or interest area. So for example, if there's someone inquiring about a diploma of community services, then they might get messaging around how they will make a real impact in their community, career growth opportunities in the care sector, or meeting qualification requirements for their current role. Someone that inquires about a short course in first aid, for example, might get something that's a little more outcome driven about flexibility in study options and certification speed. You can also personalize by lead source. So a Facebook inquiry might get a bit more of a friendly kind of conversational message, whereas a corporate client might get something that's just a bit more professional by email, outlining the ROI that they can expect from this course or group training benefits.
Okay, so let's look at lead nurture essentials and how you can use this to be essentially your behind the scenes supplementary sales team. Because the real role of nurture isn't to sell harder or faster. It's really about understanding where each student is in their decision making and helping them move forwards at their own pace. Because some students do need more information, some need reassurance, and some simply need time. So good nurturing meets them where they are and it doesn't rush them. Because when it's done well, like nurture helps students move from being unsure to just exploring to feeling confident and ready to enroll. And that usually doesn't happen necessarily in one interaction. It happens through small, consistent steps over time. And then another key part of nurture is understanding how students prefer to stay in touch, because we've, as a society, generally really changed in the way we communicate. Because people now use different channels for different reasons. For example, email for detail, SMS for quick updates, and like messaging apps for immediacy. And this is why knowing your audience just matters even more. So different groups respond better to different styles and channels. The goal isn't to show up everywhere. The goal is to show up in the right way, on the right channel, at the right moment, based on what the student needs. So effective nurture feels supportive and relevant, not overwhelming or pushy, which I feel back in the day is what it really used to be. I mean, people still do daily emails, for example, and potentially for some industries that can work really well, we have not seen effectiveness from daily emails, whereas because it's just not what our leads want. They want a little bit more understanding of where they're at and a little more space between that communication. Now, before we do go into more segmentation and personalized follow-up, I do want to cover on where that personalization actually comes from. Because segmentation doesn't necessarily start in your CRM, it starts with the questions you ask while intent is still warm. So the moment just after an inquiry is one of the highest leverage moments in the entire journey, because students are still thinking about why they reached out. And that's when context is easiest to capture. So you don't need dozens of fields, you just need essentially the right one. So I do recommend these 4 questions, and we do try and get our clients in their essentially funnel set up to answer these 4 questions, because it makes everything so much easier. The first being, what's your current situation? So this helps you understand where they're starting from. For example, are they working full-time, currently studying, unemployed, or changing direction? It tells you how study has to fit in their life, not just what course they clicked on. Second, what are your goals? So this is about why they're here. Are they looking to change careers, just meet a compliance requirement, or upskilling, for example? Because 2 students inquiring about the same course may want completely different outcomes. And if you don't know the goal, follow-up becomes very generic. Number 3 is, what are your concerns? This is a fantastic one. And for a lot of my clients, it does surprise them when they do see what their concerns are. So the concerns might be time, it could be budget, it could be job outcome, work-life study balance, all of the above as well. And that answer allows you to get really effective with your marketing and communication, because you can touch on those sort of concerns. And then the last one is, when are you planning to start? So this is obviously about urgency and sequencing. So are they looking to start immediately or in the next few months, or just exploring options? It determines how and when you follow up, not whether you follow up. So treating early stage researchers the same as urgent students definitely hurts both groups. And a common thing I have about this is a lot of clients will be like, oh, but then they might be keen to start, but they choose something else. But we can see from the data of every single one of my clients a linear pattern of the conversion rate, from the ones that say they're ready to start now have the highest conversion rate, and it's linear along the timeline. So the ones on the other side, the ones that are just researching, have the lowest conversion rate. They still might enroll within a very quick period of time, but the conversion rate of overall is lower. So that's why it's still worth adding that question in. Now, how do you add it in? So I recommend, essentially after they inquire, whether that's on a landing page or your website, the next page they should be sent to is this, essentially I call it a qualification page, that gets them to answer these questions. And I expect about 70 to 80% will go ahead and answer these questions. And that information is invaluable.
Those are great insights. So using data to personalize your sales and marketing process is incredibly powerful, and here's why it's so important. A study by Epsilon found that 80% of consumers are more likely to purchase from a brand that provides personalized experiences. Speed plus personalization equals enrollment. As I touched on, organizations that respond to leads within 5 minutes are 9 times more likely to convert. That's research by Inside Sales. Combine that with personalized messaging, and your conversion rates are going to rise significantly. A Salesforce study showed that 72% of students expect personalized communication during their learning journey. And research by McKinsey indicates that personalization can reduce acquisition costs by up to 50%, while improving your sales efficiency by 10 to 30%. Most objections come down to cost, time, and capability. Data that you collect and the types of data that Richard just touched on will help you to reassure them with evidence and responses tailored to them. If funding applies, for example, you can soften the financial objection with clarity on what they're eligible for. That level of personalization is going to help you cut through that doubt and help you increase your conversion rate. That personalization starts with your enrollment and inquiry forms, and they really just aren't for administration. These are just one of the best tools for collecting insights about what your students' goals are, their learning style, and their motivation. With eSkilled SMS and LMS, you've got completely flexible enrollment, meaning that you can capture whatever data you need to personalize communication and tailor the student experience, from funding eligibility to learning preferences to motivation and career goals. Just be mindful that when your forms become too long, they can create an inquiry block. So the key is balancing rich data collection with a smooth and frictionless experience. So using this powerful data that you collect, you can create lead nurtures that are more effective in converting. So instead of a single generic sequence, you can create tailored follow-ups that reflect what you know about the student. So here are a few things that you can consider sending. You can consider sending industry relevant case studies or testimonials that match their sector, so they're highly relevant. Short explainer videos outlining what studying with your RTO might look like, so real world assessments, trainer support, etc. Also consider providing resource guides such as funding eligibility checklists, course comparisons, or skill gap infographics to help keep them engaged while they're deciding. And you can further tailor your communications based on intent gathered at inquiry. For career changers, for example, you could send an email or an SMS that outlines career pathways and links to in-demand occupations or skills shortage lists. You can include a career outcome snapshot PDF showing potential salaries, industries, or real student success stories. And you could invite them to a career consultation call or webinar to discuss job outcomes. If it's studying for compliance requirements, you could focus your messaging on meeting mandatory qualifications or industry standards. You could include an info sheet with upcoming intake dates and short course durations, and add a testimonial from an employer or a team member who was able to meet those compliance requirements through your course. For students who are looking to upskill, you can showcase before and after student stories. So a case study, how that qualification helped lead to a promotion or a new role. You could send them a skills you'll gain visual summary highlighting immediately applicable competencies. And you could also include micro-credentials or skill set pathway learning options to demonstrate long-term growth opportunities. The goal is really to make each step of the journey feel personalized, like a personalized consult, instead of just, a generic campaign blast.
Okay, so this is a lead nurture example we commonly use. Now, I won't walk through each email in detail because the structure will be different for every business. But what matters more is how this sequence is used. So the goal isn't to build a templated sequence that every student receives, like a one-size-fits-all sequence quickly does become background noise. Because by this point, hopefully you already know things about the students, from the segmentation questions about their situations, goals, concerns, and their timing. So that information should shape what goes into this sequence. So instead of everyone receiving the same 6 emails, the same framework is personalized based on what you already know. So for example, for someone ready to start soon, the focus might be next steps, reassurance, social proof, momentum. But for someone a little bit further out, still in the research phase, the focus might be more about like the outcomes, the clarity, removing some of the concerns and building that confidence. But the structure stays the same, it's just the message changes. And this makes the sequence feel a lot less like automation and more like continuation of the conversation. So the takeaway here is that automation should support personalization, not replace it. Because when nurture reflects what students have already told you, engagement improves and decisions happen faster.
For sure. So let's talk now about the enrollment and sales strategy. Now, I know that many RTOs prefer to frame these as enrollment conversations, but at their core, these are sales conversations. You're not just collecting enrollments, you're helping them make a decision about what their future will be and their career path. And to do this, you need a clear structure. So consider this 4-step framework for sales follow-up calls. Discover, educate, guide, and invite. Under discovery, understand the student's needs first. Ask open-ended questions. Have you looked at any other courses or providers? What stood out to you? What's most important to you when you choose a training provider? Clarify their goals. Asking questions like, are there any skills or areas you'd particularly like to build on? How does this course fit into your longer-term career path? Gather context, what their employment status is, their availability and learning preferences. Ask questions like, how much time each week do you have to study? Preparing a standard set of discovery questions for your entire team will not only ensure that there's consistency between these conversations, but it will start the conversation with insight, not assumptions, and ensure that you have the right information to address their concerns. In the educate phase, you'll be positioning yourself as the expert, not the seller. So explain their options clearly, share stories of past students to help build credibility. Case studies go a long way at creating that social proof. provide comparisons to help them understand their various options without overwhelming them. You could create a simple funding and pathway cheat sheet, for example, to help ensure that your team can confidently answer questions related to that on the spot. In the next phase, you'll guide the students, helping them understand the best pathway for their situation. So you're going to match their needs with the right program structure. Use their inquiry and discovery data to personalize this guidance, and as Richard said, position it as guidance and not pressure. An actionable tip here is train your staff to use external data sources, so sources like skills shortage lists or industry trends and NCEVR enrollment data, for example. These are really powerful conversation anchors that can help your conversations feel more bespoke and help get those students across the line and enrolling with your RTO. And lastly, make it easy for them to take the next step. Clearly explain enrollment steps. From here, we'll just need to take a brief LLND test, provide your ID and payment details, and then we can get you started as early as next week. Make sure that you're handling their objections with data and you're using assumptive but friendly language. So what I mean by that, here's an example. Would you like me to lock in your enrollment today? So it's, there's a concept called assume the sale. Another helpful tip is provide your team with objection handling scripts. Reference documentation like this is really helpful for them to revisit and also just keep handy throughout the process.
Okay, so for most RTOs, a portion of inquiries will say they're 3 months or more away from starting. Now, these aren't bad leads, they're just not ready right now. So if you treat them as lost, which I commonly see, you often lose future enrollments that would have happened naturally. So the goal with these students isn't to sell harder, it's just to stay top of mind. So you can do that by providing helpful, relevant information over time. So things like industry updates, funding updates, especially graduate stories we see do really well. My biggest recommendation though is just make sure it's about them, not you. Because I see that a lot when I'm analyzing even competitors' emails. They make it a lot about them and how great they are. And to be honest, nobody really cares. So doing this, it builds familiarity and confidence without pressure. So just as important is knowing when they are ready, certain actions are strong signals. So clicking pricing or funding information, revisiting the course page, replying to messages or booking a call. So like when those signals appear, that's the moment to restart the conversation. So instead of chasing, you're just responding to intent. Because therefore the takeaway is like students who aren't ready today may be your best enrollments tomorrow. Because long-term nurture makes sure that you're there when the timing changes.
Absolutely. So let's pivot now to LLND assessments and how you can automate these to lighten the load. As you're likely aware, one of the changes under the 2025 standards for RTOs is that pre-enrollment LLND assessments must be done, so that it can't wait until after the enrollment process. So it's not just a best practice now, it's mandatory. Every RTO needs to demonstrate that students have been assessed for their language, literacy, numeracy, and digital skills before that enrollment is finalized. So, and this is really important because it helps ensure that students are placed into the right course with the right level of support, and it also protects your RTO from non-compliance in an audit. The challenge, of course, is that many RTOs are still handling assessments manually. This means, sending out the assessments by email, waiting for them to come back, relying on trainers to mark them, and then manually recording outcomes. Each one of those steps is going to delay your process and can easily get forgotten. And stalling this process can risk you losing momentum with these students who are ready to enroll quickly and make a decision. In eSkilled SMS and LMS, we've actually automated the LLND process from beginning to end and simplified it even further with AI-assisted marking. Students are automatically enrolled into the assessment as soon as they apply. Once they pass, or if they pass, the system then enrolls them directly into their course. These assessments are fully mapped to the Australian Core Skills Framework and the Australian Digital Capability Framework. So you're not just meeting the compliance, you're doing it with accuracy and consistency. With the assessment results, you'll get an instant visual report called a spiky profile, which gives trainers a clear picture on what each student's strengths are and where their skills gaps lie. So this means faster placement decisions, less admin, and just a much smoother student journey overall. Taking it a step further, AI-assisted marking brings automation into the marking process itself, and marking those essay-style responses and digital literacy questions, ensuring the results are consistent, fast, and aligned to both of those frameworks. Of course, every AI-generated result is still validated by your qualified assessors, so you still maintain complete control and full compliance over it, but it just helps speed up the process and saves your trainers hours of time. So it's efficient, compliant, and most importantly, it gives your team time back in their calendars to focus on supporting learners rather than chasing paperwork. So let's look at how your RTO can optimize the enrollment and retention phase of your sales funnel. Once a student's ready to enroll, personalization boosts confidence and removes friction. This is where learners can feel excited but unsure, so supportive messaging can help them commit and start more smoothly. Here are 5 suggestions to consider. Automatically send LLND summaries with clear, reassuring next steps to your potential students. If results are strong, confirm that they're well placed, and if support is needed, explain what's available to them so that they don't feel discouraged and the process stalls. Pair this with a recommended study plan based on their foundation skills. Number 2, use enrollment form data to suggest the study mode that's most likely to work best for them. 3, segment your onboarding sequences for new students, returning learners, and corporate learners so that each group gets the right level of guidance. Next, tailor your orientation content by goal. So perhaps compliance learners see deadlines and evidence expectations. Career changers might get extra reassurance and success stories, and upskillers might get accelerated pathway options. And lastly, add simple automation triggers. For example, if they don't log in within 48 hours, send a quick start prompt. If they stall before their onboarding tasks have begun, you can create a trainer follow-up task. These are just a few of the examples of how you can use your RTO software to enhance this stage of the sales funnel, but ultimately there are so many more options. I've plugged eSkilled, SMS, and LMS a little bit, but automation is really one of the areas where our system really shines and empowers RTOs, in addition to its advanced compliance functionality. The aim here is making enrollment and onboarding feel like a supported transition into learning and not just paperwork. Now, looking at the learning and engagement phase, once the student is enrolled and undertaking their training, it's time to support their progression. And this, again, is where automation can further support your team and your learners and reduce drop-offs and keep your students feeling like they're seen throughout the entire course. Here are 4 things that I think you should consider implementing. Number 1 is use progress-based triggers to send encouragement when someone completes a unit and reminders when they fall behind. Segment by trainer, cohort, or delivery mode so your messaging matches the learner's context. For example, workplace cohorts might get prompts about practical evidence uploads, while weekend cohorts receive reminders tied to their study schedule. 3, personalized learning support using LLND data and engagement patterns. So for example, students with lower numeracy results automatically receive extra practice activities, while fast movers can be offered extension tasks or optional micro-credentials. And lastly, consider automating trainer interventions when disengagement flags appear. So if a student hasn't logged in for 2 weeks or fails an assessment twice, use the system to create a trainer follow-up task and send the learner a booking link for support. With eSkilled's LMS, conditional automation rules make it really easy to run all of this at scale, so every learner gets the right support at the right time. The goal is to keep your learners progressing confidently without relying on your trainers to manually monitor every student. So looking at the final phase in your RTO sales funnel, completion and retention, segmentation doesn't just stop after graduation. In many ways, this is a phase where the relationship becomes the most valuable to you. The way that you follow up after the completion of their training shapes whether that student is going to come back to you for additional learning, whether they're going to refer others, or become an advocate for your RTO. So here are some things to consider implementing. Send completion emails tailored to their course and goals. Congratulate them, highlight the skills that they've gained, and connect the qualification to the next real-world steps. For example, a graduate of a care qualification might receive a pathway email about higher-level roles, while a business graduate might get options for leadership or specialist units. Use their history to offer relevant cross-sell or upskill opportunities instead of just generic promotional communications thereafter. Segment your past learners by qualification level, industry, or stated goals so that the courses you're promoting actually feel like a logical progression. You might also consider triggered timed follow-ups. So, a next step email after 30 days, and then a check-in email at 90 days to capture any new training needs that they might have. And lastly, consider alumni segments for ongoing engagement. So you can invite graduates to share testimonials or outcomes. These are such powerful tools to use in your acquisition strategy. Build referral loops with simple prompts and incentives, and send targeted industry updates or short CPD offers aligning to their field. So that's how some of the ways that personalization can drive long-term relationships and not just one-off enrollments. Okay, looking at monitoring, testing, and refining your processes. So this is one of the biggest advantages of systemizing your acquisition process. Automation is obviously great, but the real power is visibility. When your journey is systemized, you're not just guessing what's happening anymore, you can actually see it using analytical reports and dashboards that allow you to track exactly what's going on in your funnel in real time. So you can see how many inquiries came in the week, how many progressed to a consult, how many enrolled, and how long it took to move from first inquiry through to enrollment. That alone gives you a clear baseline from which you know where to invest your time in improving your process. Dashboards also will help you reveal where students are dropping off. You might notice a sharp decline, for example, after your second nurture email, or a bottleneck between consult and payment. Instead of assuming why people aren't enrolling, you can actually pinpoint the stage and more easily and quickly fix that cause, whether it's the message, the timing, or the process itself. And like Richard said, it's important to look beyond conversion rates. In a few slides, we'll talk more about some of the important metrics to keep an eye on. Over time, these metrics will show patterns, and you'll see which channels consistently bring in enrollments, which workflows are underperforming, and where small tweaks will have the biggest payoff for you. Without this data, you're just flying blind, and you're really guessing where to invest your time. So this will allow you to make informed decisions and spend less time refining your processes. And systemization is not set and forget. You build your journey, and I suppose this is really just marketing in general is not set and forget. It's always about monitoring, testing, and optimizing. And the beauty of an automated system or a systemization is that it gives you this data and you know where to focus your time. If students aren't engaging with SMS reminders, you can test a new channel, for example. Maybe that's Messenger. Or follow-up calls. But don't stop there. Here are some of the things that you really should be monitoring and optimizing regularly. So lead acquisition and speed to lead. You should be tracking how quickly inquiries are responded to. We've covered how important this is. Review which lead sources convert best and focus your energy first and foremost there. Test different web form layouts and the ordering of your questions. A shorter form might double completions, for example. Optimize your confirmation messages and first touch automation for clarity and warmth. For nurture campaigns and communication flows, ensure that you're monitoring open rates, click-through rates, and reply rates for emails and both SMS. Things that you can test and refine are subject lines, preview text, personalization fields like course name or student goal. Absolutely experiment with content length, short content versus more detailed messaging. Ensure you're A/B testing your call to action styling and wording. I mean, the lists here or the things that you can A/B test in your emails are really endless, and you should be continually trying and optimizing for what works best for your audience, because it really does differ. Looking at the conversion process, review the time between inquiry and enrollment. Can you shorten it? Check how many students are dropping off after booking a consult, but before enrolling. You can experiment with the timing of communications, same day versus next day call. And be sure to be optimizing your enrollment pages, simplifying the steps, reducing the clicks, following UX best practices, clarifying pricing or funding info, maybe adding a FAQ questions section on your page. And review staff response templates. Are they conversational and aligned to your brand tone? And are they comprehensive? Like, do they cover everything? Onboarding and early engagements. Make sure that you're measuring how many new students complete their onboarding activities within the first week. Test your welcome email series. Is it too long? Is it too light? And review your LLND communication. Are students clearly understanding what the next steps are? Optimize the orientation content as well. Consider adding short videos or checklists or AI guided walkthroughs, for example. Under retention and progression, make sure that you're tracking student logins, their assessment submission rates, and inactivity periods. As I've given some examples on, these are really great data points for triggering communications. Test the timing and tone of your re-engagement messages. Make sure that you're monitoring trainer task completion and support follow-ups. Make sure that those workflows are being closed on time. And this one is critical. Evaluate satisfaction surveys. Well, firstly, create and send satisfaction surveys and ensure that there are feedback loops to find those friction points. And lastly, your overall system health. Make sure that you're reviewing automation logs and for bottlenecks and failed triggers. This happens so often and so easy, to go completely overlooked and missed. Make sure that you're scheduling monthly workflow reviews with your team. Look for slow response points or redundant steps and get feedback from them on how the overall process is working. Make sure that you're continuously checking your channel mixes too. Is there, do you have the right mix of channels? Are there too many emails, for example, or does it have the wrong messaging sequence? And lastly, be sure to measure your outcomes like enrollment rate, cost per lead, and conversion by channel. These are really critical metrics that you're going to want to set KPIs for your RTO and your team. Over time, these small, consistent adjustments compound. You end up with a system that not only converts more students, but delivers a smoother, more personalized experience from first inquiry to graduation.
Okay, so these are like the benchmarks that we sort of set ourselves based off our experience with our clients. Every RTO and every business is going to be different, but this can just give you a bit of a guide on what to aim for. First one being the opt-in rate of landing pages. So initially, as an agency, we set ourselves a benchmark of at least 10% for a free course guide, which is obviously a very common call to action. Now, as mentioned before, the opt-in rate doesn't necessarily mean success, because quite often we will start to get initially at the 10%, then we'll push it to 15 to 20. But then from there, we'll look at the results and see whether we need to start trying to improve the quality or testing there. But it gives you a bit of a rough idea. Also, as mentioned, speed to lead under 5 minutes. There's just so much data showing the effectiveness and the impact of your speed to lead. From there, the contact rate. So at least 80%, or again, it does depend on every business, but we aim for at least 80%. If it's lower, it's looking at the landing pages, the ads, but it's also looking at your communication style. For example, a client recently came back to us, said, we're just not getting in touch with all these leads. And so I asked him what was going on. Now, this client in particular, small RTO, and the person calling was also the general manager. And so they had a lot of things to do. And so they took a long time to get to them. Plus, he was only calling. So we implemented for him an automated outreach method using SMS, email, and Facebook Messenger. What we found was the combination of them, and it was different for every person, but different people like to communicate in different ways. And what we actually found was they would communicate via one of those 3 channels, but then after a bit of back and forth, then they would appreciate a phone call and they would pick up when the GM had time to do that. And that's when the connection rates really improved. We do see, however, the best connection rates when there is a dedicated salesperson or sales team. From there, the qualified rate, so at least 40%, probably even a little bit higher, I think, on average now. And essentially, qualified is different for every RTO, depending on how they define it. For us, commonly, it's someone that they've had a decent conversation with, and they've got the budget. They are an Australian citizen, if that's important to the RTO, and they are interested in studying within the next sort of 30 to 60 days. That's what a lot of our clients will say is qualified. If that number is a bit low, obviously you need to look at the steps above that come before it. And then lastly, obviously the close rate. This is one that can be very broad. We have clients anywhere from 5% to close to sort of 20, even some months 25%. But initially, again, we try and aim for at least 10% plus. But again, you're always, like we mentioned, optimization and experimentation should never stop. We should always try to be improving each of these metrics.
Awesome. Let's look now at scalability. Once your acquisition process is systemized, you're not limited by staff capacity, especially if you're a smaller RTO. So whether you get 50 inquiries a month or 500, the process is still going to run the same way. Automation handles the heavy lifting, compliance is captured automatically, and your staff can focus where they're most needed. That's how you scale student numbers without scaling chaos. So when you systemize student acquisition, you don't just get more enrollments, you get faster conversions, happier students, stronger compliance, and a process that grows with your RTO. It's not about working harder, it's about building a system that does the hard work for you. This might sound like a lot of work, but you don't have to do it all manually. With a CRM or a student and learning management system like eSkilled, automation can take care of those repetitive tasks, flag priorities, and keep the enrollments moving forward. We've touched on automation, throughout the presentation so far, but here are some of the powerful things that you can begin to automate at your RTO. So the first is task assignment for sales staff. When a student submits an inquiry form or enrollment form, the system can automatically generate a follow-up task for the right staff member. That way, your staff doesn't have to dig through email or spreadsheets. The system is going to put that next action right in front of them. Second is triggered communications. Most RTO software or CRMs can send instant SMS or email messages at key moments. So when a student inquires, when they book a call, or if they complete an enrollment form. These automated touches will help you reassure students and just keep that process rolling. Another is re-engagement sequences. For students who stall mid-process, automation can really help to nudge them back. Or, as I mentioned, if orientation hasn't been started within a certain time frame, it can trigger a reminder for them. Dashboards and alerts. Your RTO software should be able to automatically generate reports. So showing how many inquiries have come in today or this week or this month, how many enrollments are currently in progress, how many students haven't yet completed the required steps. Managers can then quickly and easily see where the pipeline is strong and where things might be stuck without having to wait for staff to inform them manually. So, automation is not about replacing people. It's really about, giving yourself I guess more empowerment or an extra team behind the scenes supporting them. And lastly, consider automating your trainer consult workflows. Once a student completes their LLND assessment, use automation workflows to trigger tasks for trainers to review those results or, schedule their support sessions and notify the relevant staff. Students can also receive personalized follow-up emails, learning resources, or booking links, streamlining the support while reducing your team's manual admin. With eSkilled, all of these automations can be tailored to your exact RTO's process, which is, almost always unique from other RTOs, whether that's assigning, based on LLND levels or sending alerts to compliance officers or tracking intervention outcomes directly in the system. So this concludes our core presentation, but before we move on to the Q&A, I just wanted to share a special offer from RTO Acceleration and ourselves. So if you're interested in looking at our fully integrated student and learning management system, either as a replacement for your system or maybe you don't have RTO software at the moment, you can get 15% off your first year. The voucher code for that is VETtalks, as shown on screen there, so it's valid for 60 days. Richard, do you want to talk us through the offer that you're extending?
Sure. Really, just as it reads, it's quite simple. The next step, if you need help to develop this, we sort of operate up to the acquisition side. So we can help from inquiry up to the initial acquisition. And yeah, if you need help to develop this or what this might look like, if you are needing or you don't feel like you have quote unquote a system in your business, we can help show you what that might look like.
Awesome. Okay, so if you wanted to take us up on any of those offers, here are the QR codes for our website. And we would love it if you follow us on LinkedIn. So Gino, I'll pivot over to you. Do we have any questions that have come through the Q&A?
Hello, yeah, we have one here. So how can automation help organizations improve completion rates when applicants are struggling to finish their LLND assessments?
When they're struggling to complete the LLND assessment itself,
Yep.
where this takes place, I would have assumed that it would be in person, but perhaps it's online. I think you would want to look for completion timeframe. So if this is an LLND assessment that you send out to the person and they have to complete it using your software, or because I know that RTOs do this process both in person as well as using their software. So if you're using a system like eSkilled LMS to do the assessment and you've sent them the LLND assessment to complete and you don't receive back that completed LLND by a certain time period, then you can use that trigger or that data point to then kick off a lead nurture email series. You can use it to trigger a phone call, or, to create a task with one of your trainers to do a personalized follow-up to understand what those barriers might be that the student is experiencing and get them back on track. So those would probably be the ways that I would use automation to keep that process moving along. I noticed that someone had, Elia, you had your hand raised. Did you have a further question, Steph?
I can see, is it Terry? I do apologise if I've pronounced your name wrong, but also asked, do you recommend segmenting leads by course interest or by where they are in the journey, or both? So definitely both. So my recommendation is initially segmenting by hot, warm, and cold, based off when they're looking to start initially. Obviously, if they're looking to start very soon, they go into essentially the hot segmentation, and so they will be, and the sequence then is very specific and personalized to them. As I mentioned before, you're pushing more for them to take that next step of either calling, having a conversation, enrolling, as opposed to if they're still in the research phase, they still might be a cold lead, and so you'd be more, again, personalized based on their time frame. The other questions and like the course interest is more about the personalization within that segmentation, if that makes sense.
Yep. Then we have here another question from Roxanne. So how does the automated process for LLND assessment still ensure compliance, such as in terms of ensuring that the LLND assessment evidence is authentic and sufficient, etc.?
So the way that we handle that, and I'm not a compliance expert, but I'm gonna touch on this and based on my knowledge, but I'll come back to you with a more detailed answer after the session, Roxanne. But one of the ways that we ensure that it's authentic is we have webcam monitoring during the LLND process. So if you're using a system like eSkilled to do these tests, it will take screenshots of them while they're doing that LLND assessment to ensure, to verify that it is indeed the person who says it is completing that LLND assessment. And in terms of sufficiency, well, it's, the LLND assessments in eSkilled are aligned to the core, the Australian digital core skills framework, the 2 frameworks that I mentioned. So that's how we know that they're going to be relevant. And then sufficient is really going to be based on, from my understanding, the volume of their response. But let me verify that that this covers off those compliancy angles in detail, and I'll come back to you on that, Roxanne.
Yep, then we have another question from Eliza. So what is your opinion on follow-up timings and navigating the conversation when it has been some time since they were sent the info?
Yeah, this is a really good question. I've got 2 thoughts on this. So definitely I see effectiveness with just generalized long-term nurture. So that could be after they've gone through your sales system and maybe like a short-term nurture sequence. Then we put them into a long-term nurture, which might be like a communication generally via email every, say, 2 weeks, maybe even every 4 weeks. And we aim for it to be very valuable. So for example, that's where it could be like student where they are now, we see quite effective. People like to read that, and specifically on that, it's not like a long video. It might just be, if it's an email, a simple photo with a few questions. We're seeing that to be a lot more effective. And then we're using, again, mentioned like tracking what happens on the site. For example, if they click it and then they go back to the site, we'll then use that and automate a task to the sales team to say, hey, this person has gone and visited the site, clicked on these pages. We recommend you call or you text, and that's when they'll get like a very specific message. The other thing we do, if it has been a long time, is potentially reach out with an SMS, again, personalized with a bit of an offer. If we know that the data shows us that, you know, for example, after 120 days, the success rate drops off dramatically, then before that, we will send at least a sequence, and it could be 2 to 3. And we do prefer SMS because it is a bit more personal and definitely a higher open rate, with a bit of a, again, specific offer if the RTO does have one, and that could be just as simple as a bit of a bit of a discount on the total price to try and essentially reactivate them.
Okay. I saw a question here from Grace. So what are some best practices when your RTO is designed for B2B? So i.e. the purchaser is other businesses to train existing staff. So I've got a few ideas on this one, but Richard, feel free to, I guess, build on what I've said or jump in at any point. You definitely want to tailor your value proposition to business outcomes. So, you know, businesses don't buy training, they're buying improved capability, compliance protection, reduced risk, productivity gains, staff retention. Make sure that you're building sector-specific capability statements. Corporate clients are going to expect industry relevance, so tailor these capability documents to, you know, aged care, hospitality, whatever the case might be. And these capability statements should include relevant qualifications and skill sets, you know, case studies. These are things that we've touched on, compliance expertise, trainer background information. Another one is ensuring that you offer co-designed or flexible delivery models. Businesses generally need to fit training around their operations, so you need to make sure that your the training you're offering is you know, flexible. So that might be shift-based schedules, micro-learning options, rolling intake groups, you know, as a few examples. You can create employer-specific onboarding and communication flows, so that kind of aligns with the segmentation that we've talked about throughout. And really not only just onboarding and communication flows, like your entire sales process should be, tailored towards this audience, because, every communication is going to differ. And you could consider segmenting by employer type and training need as well. So, segmenting by industry, size, compliance risk, level of staff turnover. So this will, allow you to personalize messaging like developed leaders in hospitality, or, reduce manual handling incidents in aged care.
I have a few.
Yeah, and Bill, sorry, go ahead.
You sure?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I've just got a few on the acquisition side. Just a few points. A lot of our, we have a few B2B clients, and a lot of them obviously understandably ask about, say, LinkedIn and LinkedIn advertising. LinkedIn advertising we have found to be quite expensive. And so unless the average order value or average customer value is 10,000 plus, we have not seen consistent success with LinkedIn advertising if it's less than that. In saying that, and it is always quite surprising, we do find Facebook or Meta advertising to be the most effective if you are going to trying digital channels. The reason being now is, at the end of the day, a lot of people still use, just in their private life, Facebook and or Instagram. And so this, even though it's not a B2B platform, it's still, the people are still there. And with Meta now, it's all about the creative and the copy that is used to target. So if you are creating essentially an ad that is talking specifically to the exact type of business you want, and even if it is a person in a specific role, calling them out on that ad in the copy, often that's what we're finding is they are getting in front of those people. So that's what I would recommend potentially considering. Obviously, as well, more of a manual sort of sales BDM approach as well, layered on top of that.
Awesome. So we've got another question here that says, my question is, how can I overcome rejection about leads choosing to enroll in TAFE courses instead? That's a very good question. When a lead says that they're choosing TAFE, the key is to not fight the objection head on, but understand why they feel that TAFE is a better choice. And this information will then help you address their concerns with specific data. So, acknowledge without arguing, start by, validating their choice, identify those real reasons. Most TAFE objections come down to one of 5 drivers: price, perceived credibility, belief that TAFE is a safer choice, funding availability, or not understanding the difference in the student experience or support. So reframe the value of your offering without criticizing TAFE. So instead of saying why TAFE is the wrong choice for them, focus on what you do exceptionally well. And this is part of what you should be identifying in your marketing strategy, as well as how you differ and what this unique experience is that your RTO creates. Reinforce it with social proof, and invite them back in gently, even if they are leaning towards TAFE. You can say, totally understand if you go ahead with TAFE. If there's anything changes, or you find the wait times or support hours don't quite fit you, reach out. We're always happy to get you started. And you can use your your re-engagement sequence after this point to keep that relationship warm and increase the chances of a returning lead. Okay. Did we have any other questions we've missed here, Jana?
I think that's all we have.
I think, did we answer the one from, is it Sina? Regarding follow-up, yes. Do you recommend doing a follow-up call to people who are in the research phase, I'll leave them to the workflow, emails and SMS. So, and then 2, for high intent ready to enroll clients, what time frame you recommend for the first follow-up after the consultation. We currently send the info pack and give them 72 hours to read it before a follow-up call. So I know my best performing clients, as far as essentially the best sales and the highest conversion rate, they all call them as quick as they can, and they are pretty consistent. They personalize their outreach and understand where they're at, but they do 2 things. They do follow up consistently without being like annoying, but then they also are following up in various different modalities or methods. For example, SMS, email and phone calls. And they do it in a way, like I look at the reviews, they do it in a way where the reviews, people leaving reviews do say they respect sort of their time and where they're at. So even though it's consistent, they've found a way to make it just not super pushy, because and my opinion on that, again, it's just my opinion, is it's more about how you come across, as opposed to just the amount of times, and respecting where they're at. So I would try to, regardless of where they're at, still follow up, at least initially, to try and just have a conversation with them. I think at the end of the day, if they are a colder lead, still try and have a conversation, but don't push them. It might be putting them in the calendar to talk in 3 months, but still try and have that little touch point, because the more you can do that, the more you can build a relationship. I think the more successful you would be. And the one actual example I have of that is my mum was looking to study, and she was researching, honestly, about 2 years out. And the person, she inquired with quite a few people. The one guy that actually did call her, and she was honest, like, I'm literally just researching now, I'm a long way away. And he kept it very short, and obviously he didn't push, and he would just call every sort of 90 days, just a quick update. By the time she finally bought from them, he knew the whole family history and what was going on, but he didn't actually spend that much time. It was just like 3-minute phone calls every 90 days and the occasional text message or email. So he finally got her, and no one else that she inquired with did that, and that's why she enrolled with them. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, that's a great example. Okay, we've got another question here. How do you feel it's best to get around the roadblock in terms of a client's internal processes? So yeah, internal processes are one of the biggest roadblocks in, converting B2B training. So even, if a business wants to enroll staff, they've often got layers of approvals that can slow down the decision process, especially if it's a larger organization. And the goal isn't to fight those processes. Part of it is patience, as Richard just touched on, and keeping those leads warm. It's to work with them and make the next steps as easy as possible. So, here are some ways that you can get around that roadblock. Identify what their internal process is so that you can understand it and, tailor your communications, your personal communications around that process. For example, if you know that it takes X amount of days to get this approval, then you can create a reminder for yourself to follow up with them in X number of days. You can also help them by providing documentation that accelerates their approvals. So maybe you can help them remove approval friction points by giving them, you can help them with their business case. You can give them a 1-page summary of the program, funding or cost breakdown, or compliance alliance details. When you hand them exactly what the decision makers need, it's going to help to expedite that process dramatically. Offer to support them with internal communication. Sometimes the biggest blocker is the client needing to sell that initiative internally. So you can help them through providing a short justification email or our ROI statement, for example. Make sure that you're always following up with value and clarity. If internal approvals go quiet, don't just check in. Provide something useful, and we do that from an email perspective all the time because we've got I would say an ambitious email schedule, but we are always making sure that we lead with something of value. Telling our RTO clients what's happening with enrollment rates, or whether there's industry changes or things like that. So those are a few ways that you can handle that.
I think, Sina, I forgot to answer the second question of Sina's. And Harmony, you might want to weigh in on this because it's more on the sales side, I believe. Essentially, it was after you've had that initial conversation, how long should you wait to follow up? So from just my own sort of sales experience and training, I aim to always, after the conversation or after any real conversation, is set the next conversation or set the next task. So ideally at the end of that initial conversation, to have a plan on when you'll go, what the next task is, and when you're going to reach out again, that's agreed upon. So again, that will depend on whatever the answer is there. I don't know, Harmony, if you have any additional thoughts.
Yeah, I would say within 24 hours, ideally same day, and here's why. Decision fatigue increases the longer that they wait. Sending the info packet doesn't necessarily mean that they'll read it. If someone's ready to enroll, they don't need 3 days. They need reassurance, clarity, and a smooth next step. Giving them 72 hours can really stall this momentum. Another reason is high intent students expect a faster response. They're ready to make that decision much faster. And a short touch point is enough. It doesn't need to be a long phone call. It can just be a simple, just checking in to see if you have any questions. Did you want help after completing your enrollment today? Would you like me to walk you through the next steps? Low pressure, high clarity. Cool. Do we have any other ones, or have we covered that off? I know there was one on how the webcam pictures work from a privacy perspective. I'll have to come back to you on that, Adam. So I'll get back to you on that. I would imagine, I'm just guessing, but I would imagine that there's a disclaimer that students accept as part of that, but I'll confirm. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for your time. I really appreciate it. And Richard, thank you so much for co-presenting this with me. It's been, I hope, a valuable session for everyone. Yeah, as promised, there were a couple of questions that we will follow up with in the next day or so. Excellent. Have a great afternoon, everyone. Thank you again.
See you later.
Bye.